More to Marketing. Welcome to More to Marketing, the podcast that explores marketing, product, and everything business. I'm your host, Susan Walsh, and today we're talking about how successful you can use photography to actually bring about not just your brand, but a campaign to life. I'm very fortunate today to have a special guest, Lila, and she is a professional photographer. She's been doing this for over a decade and has really honed her craft in this industry, and she has a past in business, so she can really merge those two together to get the most out of it. She brings a huge amount of skills from commercial advertising, food lifestyle shots, which make me drool, portraits, and also has a specialty in working with vegan-friendly products. Her eye for detail makes Lila an expert in all things photography branding, and I'd love to hear more about you and welcome you to the podcast. Hi, Lila.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad to have you here, but tell us a bit more about you, your journey, and your love of photography.
Oh gosh, that's a bit of a backlog there. My journey, I've actually started way back doing fashion design and makeup artistry before I worked in the world of photography. So I guess I come with a bit of a unique standpoint of where I've come from, because I come from the styling and visual side of it from a different aspect behind the lens. And I've merged that with my photography. So I bring in, I guess, a bit more of a bigger visual image of how a campaign should come together. When I'm looking at my advertising and commercial work, I'm really thinking about creating a visual story. You know, there are some photographers that really just focus on your lighting aspects, but I'm really here about creating a brand vision and how we can create a brand vision and really make a business more money, to be honest. That's where I bring in my business side of things. You know, I think as a photographer, you can easily get absorbed into the world of beautiful imagery, but if it doesn't make you money, well, we're not doing the right thing.
Exactly. And even if it is beautiful, the target audience, can they picture themselves using it? It might be too beautiful.
Exactly. Well, yeah, I mean, you really have to consider where the audience is. I mean, a prime example is someone like Lowe's, right? Their brand, you know, you can see in everything they do, from the TV commercials to their billboards to their signage in store, they're targeting a very specific dynamic of people. And it's like, you might look at those images and be like, oh, they're not great. But that's the demographic they're going for. They're going for cheap, easy, accessible. So yeah, exactly. Refining who your customer is and targeting them is so key in creating a really strong brand visual.
No, I 100% agree. And you see so many different cases of this. And I suppose over the last 5 years, you've probably seen a bit of a change in how photography is used. So are you able to share some of your insights that you've noticed over the industry?
Yeah, it's been really interesting. It's kind of, for me, there's kind of three aspects that I would say have changed. We've got one aspect where there is definitely a real shift to bold, dynamic, in-your-face photography. You know, we're kind of shying away a little bit, I would say, from that kind of light and airy look to really high impact contrast. And I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that, you know, we really need to get people's attention quickly. So it's really that really like grab in your face kind of look. The other thing I would say we're definitely seeing a lot more of is a lot more narrative driven photography. It's all about trying to sell an emotion, you know, and this is something that big companies have done for a long time. If you think about, you know, Coca-Cola, for example, but we're definitely seeing it trickle down in a way that, you know, even medium-sized brands are realizing that selling this aspirational idea is so important when it comes to campaigns. So they're starting to really look at how can we create this lifestyle and brand identity. And then I would say the third thing that I find is really interesting is actually we've also, in contrast to this really high polished, high contrast image, what we're also seeing is this almost like undone, you can do it yourself kind of look, where it's like user friendly. Yeah. More like, you know, like, oh, I've just captured this on my phone, which is something that's really different to what, you know, these really high polished images are. But it's this kind of look of, you know, it's accessible. Anyone could do this. A prime example for me at the moment is Apple's latest campaign for their iPhone. You look at the images of it and, you know, one of the billboards at the moment is a close up of a little baby, you know, that is specifically not done in a picture perfect studio, but their whole image, you know, I think the tagline is something like capturing the next generation. And it's selling that idea of like, oh, it's not even about how great this is, it's about capturing a moment, you know. And it's a completely different style of photography, even though there would have been a whole team there. They're making it seem like someone just snapped that on their phone.
And I following on from that, the mobile example, there's been some mobile ones in the past where they literally do use shots from users of that type of phone and promote that phone at the same time, going, this was taken by Sam. Sam was in some mountain range somewhere using the latest blah blah device, just to try and show how great their new cameras are when you're out and about.
Yeah, so exactly.
It's quite a clever use of it, because you're getting your social content in there at the same time, as well as the product being used, and then bringing it back to the audience.
Completely. And it's interesting as well, like from my point of view, I've definitely been asked to create more user content than I've ever had before, you know, and even to the point of there has been a couple of instances. I recently did a short campaign for Vicks, the inhaler, and they specifically asked me to film it on my phone, which I was, you know, totally not how I normally do, but interesting. They specifically wanted user content that was filmed on a phone. And so, yeah, it's an interesting shift that we're seeing, you know. I don't think it's the end of photography, but an interesting mix, I think, between that really high polished studio bold look and that really user friendly, anyone can do it style.
Yep, exactly. And I think this really leads us on to what you consider are the fundamental elements of a successful photography campaign, and the why behind it, because you've given a few different examples of the 3 trends, but what actually makes it successful, when we're just down to the basics of what you should be looking at so that you know you're on the right path?
For me, the biggest thing is really knowing your target audience, you know, and it's something that I cannot stress enough. I have, you know, people come to me quite often and I say, like, who are you targeting? And I've had a few people say, oh, everyone. To which I say, well, then you're targeting no one. You know, it's so important to know who you're targeting, because that drives your color choice. You know, it drives the models that you use. It drives the difference between, like you say, whether you go for high polished or whether you go for user friendly content. And that is truly, it's the key to everything. That for me, when I'm working with a new client, is my starting point. Who are we driving this content for, and where are we trying to create the aspiration behind the brand? Because if you think about someone, again, if we go back to, for example, Coca-Cola, they're a great big brand. They're all about having that lifestyle, that fun, bold imagery, great looking models, you know, really in your face campaigns. It's all about selling that moment in the sun. If I take the way they photograph and I do it for something like incontinence pads for over 60-year-olds, and say we create a campaign that's like, you know, old people that are out there having fun, but they're just in these pads and, you know, it's really in your face, that's not going to hit the target demographic. Now, if you take those old people having fun and do it this same kind of style as Coca-Cola and shoot it with Coca-Cola and say, hey, like, when you're 60, you could still be having fun. You could still be this cool if you drink Coca-Cola. It's going to work, you know, but that's not going to work if you're targeting this different demographic. So it's like understanding who your client is drives the entire photography process.
And I guess that another layer to it as well is finding out from the marketing team what assets and what placements is going to be behind it as well, because it'd be a difference between a catalog versus a social media campaign versus a billboard versus a magazine. So many different iterations that you need to find out where it's going to be to know how the image should be shot too.
Oh, completely. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the even subtle things like the amount of negative space needed for how much wording is going around, you know, people, definitely think it's very easy to just take a whole bunch of shots and utilize them wherever you
No.
You know, if I'm shooting for a social media campaign versus, for instance, a website banner, just so long and narrow, it's a completely different way of shooting. Yeah, it's kind of one of my go-to first after knowing what the idea is,
Yes.
where are these images going?
And I think that's where a lot of companies struggle because they think one photo will do all, where really you need a variety that will cover your landscapes, your portraits, your different sizes, like you said, the negative space, so
Yeah.
that you have a collective, I don't know, a minimum 10 images of the same type of image that you can work on for all those different areas.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the other thing to consider as well is there's different ways to sell your product. I've found with some brands, they'll invest in beautiful e-commerce products, which is definitely need to go to straight away, need good e-com. But then they'll try and use those as their campaign images. And it's different, like you need to have a strong product image that when someone clicks to your website, they purchase it. But when it comes to a campaign, it's so much more about selling an idea.
Yes.
It's such a different look and feel. And it's sometimes you find even with those campaign images, your product is the smallest aspect within that photo. It could just be a bunch of people laughing, for example, if it's a beer company. People laughing, having a great time. The beer's just in someone's hand. That is a completely different look and feel to your e-commerce shoot where it's product front center, clean, purchase me now.
Exactly. And I find one of the other things a lot of people are putting into their photography is props, even for those ones for the e-com site, that they're really filling them with, say it's a native Australian product, and it's got a lot of those like wattle and whatever, eucalyptus, whatever it is. They throw them all over the background of it, throw a couple of leaves down, some gum nuts. Have you seen a lot of that as well happen out there? And what's your views on overusing props for your products for e-com?
It's a fine line, for sure. I think those shots look beautiful, but to be honest, I think they should be your campaign shots. If you're selling the idea of like, see how much nature is involved in that product, they're stunning. But I still think it's so important to have a clean e-commerce shot. I just think people underestimate, just having a clean product shot. And the way I think about it as well is you do that product shot once, you've got uncapped profit on that. You only need to do it once and get it right and nail it. You can then, cut out the background. You can do so many things with that. But I think if you've got an image that's got all those props around it, you're going to have a harder time. I think that those shots are beautiful. I think they're great for your social media, your campaigns, your website banners, your billboards, but have a backlog of e-commerce that's clean on file.
Yep. That makes complete sense as well. Because even then you can just change out the background if you wanted to, just to give it a bit of a spruce up if you chose to. You didn't have to do a whole new shoot.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I think it's just a staple. Staple for any business, have it on file, and then invest in those kind of stylized looks that are going to be really eye-catching.
Yeah. You've spoken a lot about how photography is part of telling a story. So like storytelling as part of photography. Have you had any particular concerns with brands or doing the identity or building out the marketing goals when you're doing these storylines through photography?
I think not concerns. I think sometimes for me, it's more the brand having a real understanding of who they're targeting. Like I mentioned before, I can always work with someone to build a story, but if they don't have a solid concept of who they're aiming to, that's when it's a real struggle. I think when some brands really, like I said before, they try and target everyone, and it's a missed opportunity to really hone in on who you're kind of going towards. And sometimes this takes time to develop,
and it evolves too, I'd assume.
Yeah, exactly. And there are times where you may want to even, approach a different market. I mean, a prime example that I can think of recently was I was shooting Brasilia coffee. And they're a coffee brand. They're in South Australia, Italian coffee brand. And they had realized their target market was about kind of like the plus 60-year-olds, in the supermarket chains that purchase their coffee. Now, they realized this, they had a solid market, but they wanted to break into a new market. And what I found really interesting about this was sometimes it's not even about they already had an established market. So it wasn't about that market. It was like, how can we extend it? We don't need to actually advertise to these guys anymore. They're shopping our product.
Yep.
How can we get a newer market? So for them, they wanted to get a younger market. So we came up with this idea to have a European style setup with their coffee, a young couple, model couple that looked very European. It was all about creating the romance about coffee. And it was about doing this whole campaign that targeted young people, that targeted this kind of new love of coffee and romance that you kind of see in those, what's the brand? Mocha.
Oh, yep, mocha ads, yep.
Yeah, exactly. Because for them,
but also in the movies, that's what you see in the movies as well with coffee.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so for them, it was like, this was almost like a bit of a rebranding exercise. They had one market, check. How do we now extend our new market and create that narrative? And so it was a really interesting campaign to relaunch them in a new direction. But it worked because they knew who they were targeting. Younger people in their 30s that wanted to have coffee at home, that weren't going out, and wanted to bring that romantic sense into their feel of their coffee and their brand.
And again, storytelling, bringing that in so that they could feel that as well when they're hopefully having their cuppa on a Sunday morning too.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that was it. There was so many different scenes that we did with that campaign. There was, your breakfast in bed, your breakfast outdoors, a date night. It was very much about the couple connecting. The product was in the shot, but it wasn't the hero. The hero was these two people connecting. And it was that idea of, if you drink our coffee, you could have the romance that we have.
And again, kind of that storytelling is so important. And it really needs to flow through all elements. So not just the photography, but the wording, the language, everything was seamless there. And that's how photography is so important, because it's one of the grounding pieces.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, for instance, with that, their wording is for the love of coffee. Simple.
Yep.
That same narrative, bringing it back to romance, love, driving home that message within the whole campaign.
Yep. No, that's beautiful. Do you have any other examples that you could share of past, it doesn't have to be your own, but other past ones that you've seen that are really successful campaigns using photography and why it was so effective?
Oh gosh. I mean, there's so many out there. It's so hard to narrow it down.
I think for me, one of the ones which isn't still photography, but it's visual photography, and how they did the storyline. Forgive me, everyone, I cannot remember the insurance company, but the story of Kutut.
Oh, yes.
And how that went on for like 2 years.
Yeah.
But it started with the holiday. And then over time, the romance and everything as well. But it was just done in such a nice, clean, but clever way that you had the photography telling the story. So as soon as you saw him or her, you knew exactly what this product was at that moment in time. I forgot what insurance it is, but
it did its job, obviously.
But that went on for years.
Yeah, I definitely think a strong contender for this would definitely be Qantas. Their campaigns that they do that are all about reuniting people, especially around COVID. Again, a lot of this was motion, but the campaign that they did that was around surprising a loved one by bringing home, and they did one ad that was bringing home a son from London and surprising his family in Australia. God, I cry every time I see that. But exactly, it's driving that emotion and connection. I mean, really, at the end of the day, they're just a flight company.
Yep.
But what they're driving is, we're not just here to fly, we're here to connect people. And that is such a strong message that is so different from, we get you from A to B. It's, we get you to see your loved one. And that's just the power of creating that story.
Exactly. And even if you keep going down the lines of airlines that try and do things a little bit differently in their photography and really use what their assets are, I think New Zealand, so Air New Zealand has been doing a fantastic job for many, many years, particularly when Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and all of those movies were coming out. And, using their assets and teaming up with tourism. So that to the point that they had even some of their videos on how the stewardesses doing their whole boring spiel that you hear every time, but making it exciting and new with their video content. So people actually wanted to watch it to the end and see what new placements have they got, what characters are they building out, where on Middle Earth are people gone to learn about how to sit on a plane and leave and get off it safely.
Yeah.
So I think they really used everything they could in such a way to build up not only tourism, but also the airline as well, and put it across all the different types of media to really get the most of it. Because even if you looked at some of their ads that they have, they're picturesque and gorgeous with minimum wording, but they have a normal person in the picture. It's not a model, it's an everyday person. And it really does make you think that you could be that person there.
Yeah, it's interesting. I work on a lot of campaigns where they're now actually asking for everyday people. You know, I say with bunny ears because, you know, they still like to be good looking everyday people.
Yep.
But it is interesting thing. I guess it goes back to creating that more user content friendly, you know, photography. We are now getting more and more requests for less model looking, or definitely at least diversity within the kind of models that we get. And yeah, I'm getting a lot more requests for everyday people. So it has that relatability aspect to it. So exactly right. You can envision yourself being the one that has this product, or it's more, you know, as well, like if you use this product, you could be this person, but without it being so disconnected that, you know, you have to be a model to be able to be this person.
Exactly. And I suppose that comes down to a bit of how do you actually navigate the balance between artistic expression in the photography and also fulfilling the strategic need of the brand as part of that brief?
There's one lesson that I really took from working with the big businesses that I used to, and that is that what I find really interesting about just people in general is you can have such different views in what you think is aesthetically pleasing. And as a creative, that can be challenging sometimes because, you know, you can see your photography work as a reflection of you. And if someone doesn't like it, it can hit hard. But the biggest thing that I've learned through doing business is one, everyone sees things differently. But two, what's important is what's going to make business money for the business, you know, at the end of the day. So it's a matter of stepping outside of what you see as visually pleasing and thinking about how is this going to drive sales and how can we merge the two? Because, you know, like we were talking about earlier, e-com with all that beautiful flowery things about it is gorgeous, but is that going to make you any more money than having a stagnant e-com shop? You know, so what is really going to drive the product? And at the end of the day, it is about making more money for the business and highlighting the product. So there are aspects when you're doing creative projects where actually less is more, because you may find that going all these fancy things, fancy lighting, fancy props actually takes away from the message, and sometimes keeping it clean and simple and working with how is this going to drive sales takes a lot of the personal out of it. You know, you can't get offended if it's like, hey, what's going to make money, what's not, you know, and it allows you to think a lot more strategically about the project.
Have you done a lot where it comes to A/B testing on images, or going into focus groups or anything like that to see different images? Because I hear a lot about that, particularly when you've got these big companies that are going to invest millions and millions of dollars into campaign, but they want to make sure. You know where I'm going with this.
Yeah. No, I haven't done that personally, but it's an interesting idea to think about. It's also what I find really interesting as well is different markets as well. So, for example, I'm in the middle of a project that hasn't been released at the moment. I can't say the brand, but what's interesting about this brand is they've already got a backlog of photography, but it's from America, and that's fine. But interestingly, in Australia, for them to bring their product here, there's a lot of regulations that are really different to the US, you know, so those photos might be beautiful, but they're actually not applicable here. So that's been really interesting looking at the different markets, you know, and the different regulations. even little things, for example, that we're dealing with where within Australia, if you're using, I don't want to say chemicals, flavor enhancers rather than the natural products. So say I'm using a lemon flavoring rather than a lemon. There's legislation around how much lemon, as in the product, sorry, how much of the actual fruit can be in the image to see, balance it out based on, whether it's a natural product or not. So all these kind of legislations that in America wouldn't matter. They could have the product surrounded by lemons to give it the idea that this is created by lemons. But in Australia, if it's not actually come from the juice itself, we're really restricted. So it's interesting having to work with that, because it's like, okay, well, how do we give the same look and feel, but without the natural element? Okay, well, how can we bring in things such as color play and utilize yellow, utilize things like freshness, zestiness within a more abstract way to give the look that we're after, but within our market.
It's interesting how restrictive Australia is, but it's all about ensuring there's no misleading.
Yeah.
And I've had experience with this when I used to work for Guthrie Ranker, where we want to use the American product that's already been tried and tested, but because of chemicals within the product, we can't. And also further to that, you can't use any photography from anyone that's got the before and after pictures unless it's genuine.
Right. Yeah.
So within Australia, because you're working with your American counterparts, that person's already moved on. They took those photos ages ago, 6, 12, 24 months, whatever it was ago. You can't get the detail from them in some cases about how long did they use the product for, what was the severity, blah, 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 all those details that you might need to give to regulators here in Australia to be able to go, yes, this is legitimate. So then you have to go down the path of, okay, let's find some people in Australia, let's actually get them in, let's look at them, assess them, give them the product for free, wait 6, 12, whatever the time period is, and then I can do the after photos.
Yeah, exactly. I know, it's funny. I don't think a lot of people realize how different markets from overseas are, and especially if you're not in this world, I think people just presume, oh, it's an international company, they've just used the same imagery. But no, it's not the case at all.
No, Australia is very strict, and it's good, but it also can be a bit frustrating when you've got double costs then when it comes to photography, where they almost look the same. You could get someone that still looks very similar, same demographic, age and everything, and then you just have to find someone else in the other country, and the photos almost look identical from where you look at the severity of like acne in my example.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, and that's the other thing, right? When you're trying to take brand consistency, you want it to look similar. You want it to almost look the same, because that's still your brand, right? So exactly right. It's when I'm working on these projects with overseas companies, I'm wanting to replicate a similar style. So yeah, I could imagine, for these companies, you're like, Christ, we're so close. Damn it, if I just had one less lemon, Can
I Photoshop that out?
Yeah,
exactly. Not quite. It's true. It's so true. But what excites you most about photography?
I think for me, it's actually because, like I say, I'm a bit of a business geek. I love getting to know businesses. I love getting to know like who their customer is, who their client is. And I love being able to take that and turn it into a visual. I think it's something that is not a skill that everyone has. And it's something that I'm really keyed into, that visual. I really like being able to conceptualize and make an abstract kind of form and see subtle ways that I can enhance a brand. For me, I get really excited about like, how can we create this brand identity? Because at the end of the day, unless you've tried a product, you're buying it based on how it looks.
A lot of the time, yes.
Unless there's social proof, you're going on, we hate to say don't judge a book by its cover, but we all do. So being able to create that image for me gets me really excited. Being able to see how we can push a brand and how we can create more revenue just based on their looks, it gets my gears going, and I can't stop thinking about it.
I completely understand that as well, because it really is bringing it to life. You're putting it into a setting or telling a story with it, or showing it in a way that's probably never been done before too. So that's also a new frontier. So that would be very exciting as well to be part of that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And really pushing it, I think even in simple ways, I remember I did a shoot a little while ago for a somersault body, and a really beautiful natural brand, and they had a beautiful coffee scrub, and I photographed it on a bed of coffee, coffee beans, and it's a simple shot, but it was quite striking. And it was really interesting because even though it was such a simple setup, they'd never thought to go that way. So, just even being able to create a different avenue for a brand, to me, is really exciting. Sometimes you can have an established look, which is great, but pushing it in a new direction can really just bring new life, and it can be something that hadn't even been thought of before, because they have such an established identity. So being able to bring that kind of fresh take on it is exciting.
No, I can definitely hear your passion in all of this, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I love it.
Well, I have a question I ask everybody. So, what brand, any brand in the world, best represents you and why?
Oh God, this is this is a tough one.
It can be more than one.
No, I think I have to. The first thing that comes to mind for me is Apple. And the reason I say that is because I love how sleek, minimal, refined they are. But for me, the other biggest thing about them is there's so much about the narrative and the emotion in the way that they sell. And for me, that's like what I really resonate with. I'm an emotionally driven person. I love like connecting with people and connecting emotionally with a brand, So for me, that gets me excited, like how can we bring joy or, connection into this world, and also I like to think that people are brand loyal, that I attract that kind of consumer, that people want to work with me. They're an Apple kind of person.
I love it. I love that you thought through all the aspects there as well.
Yeah. All the key components.
Thank you. Is there any final things you'd love to share before we wrap up?
I mean, I think the biggest thing for me is really just considering how, from a marketing point of view, never underestimate your photography. I think sometimes we can really get distracted by your return on investment and where we're going to plug it and where we're going to, put this word out there. But if you don't have a solid image that creates a really strong brand identity, doesn't matter where it goes. You're not going to get your image across to the world, and you're not going to get your story across. So taking the time to really consider the visuals and making sure it really communicates who your brand is so key to the success of your business.
No, I 100% agree. I've done marketing in some of my past life as well, and it really is. It just solidifies everything together.
Yeah.
So a quick wrap up for everyone. So Lila was here to talk about photography, and in particular, some of the changes we've seen very recently is people going for more bold images that are in your face, very high contrast, high impact, and probably because they're trying to really do a cut through because of people not having as much dwell time anymore. There's also the narrative of actually selling the aspirational lifestyle of the product using photography. So that's part of that emotive piece. And then there's also some changes happening where people are actually asking if the business image photos can be more unfiltered, the pure capture of the moment to evoke something that people want to feel that could be them. They could actually be the one taking that photo as well. Some fundamentals of success, though, is 100% to know your target. Make sure you know who your audience is, where they are, everything about them, so you can actually be able to brief your photography team to get the best out of it possible. Also, what's the aspiration behind the brand? Where are you trying to go with it? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to sell something, go places? What is it? Make sure that's clearly communicated to your photographer as well. But another big piece is, where are you going to use these images so that different versions can be made to be used in all the different ways? So you need to think of things like negative space, banners on websites, social content, page sites, all of those. But it's important to also consider your product e-commerce version versus your campaign imagery, because you always want to have a plain Jane version with nothing around it. So you can use that on your e-com and have all your other images with your props, your life cycle, and everything like that happening with your lifestyle for your campaign, because then people get more emotive with those. Storytelling is highly important when it comes to photography because it's part of the brand and bringing it all to life. And the imagery will be key to this so that people actually have that connection and can picture themselves there. So think about even having a bit of diversity in there or whatever it might be to make sure that it makes sense. And you cannot please everyone with the photos. No photographer can take a photo that everyone will be happy with. So when you're internally assessing the images, make sure you step back from your personal view and look at it from who is my audience? What out of these pictures will help me drive my business needs? What will help my business to be able to get the cut through it needs for the sales? And what highlights the products the best? Because otherwise you're going on your gut when you really should be going on what your audience is going to resonate with. And last but not least, never underestimate the power of photography because it is the cornerstone to your campaigns. Did I miss anything there?
No, you nailed it. I love it.
Thank you again so much, Lila. I will have all your details in the show notes so people can connect with you and hopefully use your services as well. For everyone else, don't forget to add more to marketing to your playlist so you don't miss out on any other fabulous guests in the future. More to marketing.